Okay? And he talks about it as he's teaching tackling. I'm not going to teach how to tackle. But he talks about it because what's important in vertical progression when you're teaching is that you've got to lay, what do we mean by vertical progression? We've got to start where? If we're going to progress vertically, we've got to start at the bottom. We've got to build a base, okay? And that's what we're doing in this class, okay? We're building that base. You're not ready to design programs yet, but you're getting there, okay? And so when we talk about strength training and program design and conditioning, it is a vertical progression process, at least initially. So right now we've laid the foundation of energy systems, right? We understand how to identify sports based on the energy demand that's required and why we shouldn't train long distance for football and basketball and why we should do other things, right, for different sports based on energy demand. Now you have an understanding of prime mover, okay? And while we haven't really, that's part of your skill analysis assignment, as a class we haven't broken down each sport for you to identify specific prime movers, you can, I hope, see the importance of that. That while we focused on weight room activities, you can still take that same idea, that same concept, and focus on sport-specific movements, right? Which is part of your skill analysis that's due on Thursday. So that's the whole process. It would take us, we would spend a year going through every sport to break down each skill, right? But you see the importance of that. So now we're starting to understand that, well, that's going to be critical as we even design a warm-up. A warm-up isn't just, hey, go run some laps and stretch. It can be, but is that best practice? Okay, and when we talk about how your degree and your certification sets you apart from someone else is because you know and understand the research that's going to design best practice, okay? So warm-up and flexibility stretching is an area I'm very passionate about. I really, really think that there's a lot we can learn from warm-ups and flexibility time, okay, for all athletes. And there is a science behind it, okay? Still today, at probably even some upper level collegiate and Olympic sports, because believe it or not every Olympic sport even has a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Okay? There is still kind of the old idea that you just go jog, you stretch, you do a few twists and turns into three components. And you see this one here is the general. Okay, so let's start there. The general warm-up. And we know, as we've already mentioned, that, man, can we get some markers that work? We know that the purpose of the general warm-up is what we just mentioned, okay? To increase core temperature and to prepare the body for movement, right? To help prevent injuries. So the general warm-up, as all associations and organizations recommend that we do some type of general movement first before we get very specific. The general warm-up should last about how long? 5 to 10 minutes, right, okay? So let's say this is, we'll say 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, okay. All right, so the general warm-up should last about 5 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes, so somewhere in this time range. And what should happen? Do we start really high, or where do we start? How do we get rolling with the warm-up? We know the intensity is to start low and go where? Do we need to be at 100% at the end of 5 minutes? No, we can't be, right? That wouldn't be smart at all. But let's say we want to get to 100%. That's our ultimate goal. Well, we've got to start somewhere. So we need to start low at a very low intensity. This is intensity, right? Intensity. And we need to gradually build. All right? And it might not be quite that linear, but you get the idea. What kind of things would get me there, though? What can I do? Jog. Yeah, jog's probably the best, easiest, most accessible thing we could do, right? Some swimmers even jog before they get in the pool. Some cyclists jog before they get on the bike. Now, you could do those things too, and you could do other things, but jogging is probably the easiest. What else could you do? Okay, let's not go there yet. Let's stay general. So full body movements repetitively, right? That's what we're kind of talking about. She said dynamic stretching. Don't go there yet. When you think of general, you're thinking of full body movements that are going to do a couple of things. So jogging, potentially jumping jacks, but could they be too high intensity initially? Yeah, they're actually contraindicated by the organizations for intensity because of the impact, okay? You're at high impact immediately, okay? Not to say that we couldn't incorporate those maybe minute 3 or 4, but potentially in the beginning. Think of a group exercise class. We wouldn't start with, well, some may, but before we move to jumping jacks, what could you do? March or jog in place, right? Sounds goofy, but it's what we do. And then we move to some type of maybe step touch and right into jumping jacks. So yeah, jumping jacks would be good, probably minute 3 or 4. What else? We could walk, but what's the problem with walking? We're kind of limited on our intensity, right? Maybe we could start with walking, then go to jump jacks. Power walking, yeah, maybe. What if we were here in the West Center? Do elliptical. You do the bike. Somebody mentioned the bike. You do the stair climber, right? Jogging's the easiest. So jogging could be the answer for all of that. But just to give you some other things that we could do. Really any light cardiovascular type of movement. You do want to be cautious with jumps. Okay? Back to kind of jumping jacks or any type of jump initially right away. That's the highest injury rate for the Achilles. If the Achilles isn't quite warm yet, you can snap that Achilles pretty quickly, okay? But once we get some blood flowing to that lower body and we incorporate some increase in core temperature, then including jumps will be fine, even in the general warm-up, those light intensity jumps, okay? All right, so let's see. Yeah, appropriate activities, jogging, cycling, swimming, cardio. Tell me what happens. Right? Heart rate goes up. What else happens? We go out to the track. We start a jog. What's going to happen? Heart rate. What else? Say it again.
Increase in body temperature.
Okay. Core temperature goes up. What else? Say it again. Okay. Looser muscles. Hint. They're right there. What else is going to go up? What else is going to happen?
Increases blood flow.
Yes, thank you. That's important. Increases blood flow. What else? Yes, the joints become more lubricated. Okay? Synovial fluid starts to be released and starts to work in those joints so that we have a little bit more lubrication. And here's one piece that I'm convinced that if we're not careful with our warm-ups, we can miss. What do you think I mean by improved mental focus?
Okay, I'm at practice.
Okay? I'm at practice, right? Not driving, doing all this other stuff, whatever. So, before practice starts, we call this a broad attentional span, right? A broad attentional span. But what happens as you start those laps, let's say you're jogging, what happens as those laps begin with that attention span? It slowly starts to come in. It may not go pinpoint in a few seconds, but it's going to start to narrow just a little bit, okay? That's really critical because guess what research says about focus and injuries? Yes, the more broad the attention span, the greater the risk for injury, okay? When you're focusing on birds and trees and sounds and who's walking down the hall and stuff in front of you even right now, groups, okay? The heart rate and all that, we're good. As long as we don't sit down, we're good, okay? Guess what? Where are you if you're not on the court and you're playing basketball? You're sitting down. So we don't necessarily have to consider this philosophy that Sitting down after warm-up is terrible, because it happens. There's no other, Taylor, is there anywhere else for us to go on the basketball court if we're not playing? We can't really stand on the sideline and jog, right? I mean, we could, but that probably wouldn't be right. We could do what? Get on the elliptical, like on the sideline. In lacrosse, because you know you play softball. In softball, if you're not playing, where are you? You're on the bench. I know, I spent enough time there myself, so we're good, right? And I know all about the bench. Tell you all kinds of stories. Yeah, even if you're not on the football field, where are you? Yeah. So guess what? Once we warm up, there are going to be times where we're sitting down. But we've got to get the heart rate up initially. We've got to activate and mobilize, potentiate muscle groups. We do that through our general, then we move to the general specific, okay? And then we can get a little bit more specific after that, all right? But our goal here is, again, more mobility and activation of muscle groups that are going to be utilized. So, appropriate activities, things that I like to do here. First, I will say, Destiny likes this word dynamic, and I'm going to throw it in here. If you are, well, I do absolutely recommend dynamic, ballistic types of movement. Let's hold off on the ballistic for just a second. Let's just focus on dynamic, okay? Dynamic warm-up, or dynamic is really flexibility. It's not a warm-up. Should be really used with the term flexibility. Dynamic stretching or movements are very appropriate here. And in fact, there's no research to suggest that dynamic is harmful in any way, whether it's for injury rates or whether it's through performance. In fact, most of the research on dynamics says it's very helpful, okay? So you absolutely should include dynamic flexibility-based movements here. That's what we're going to have a lot of fun with on Thursday. Make sure you dress appropriately for activity, because we're going to do it, okay? So we can do dynamic. Listen, let's talk about what is the difference between dynamic, static, and I'll even throw ballistic over here. Okay, so what type of stretch is a static stretch?
Go and hold.
It's a held stretch, right? You get into the position, you hold it. Okay? What type of stretch is dynamic? It's a moving stretch. Then what's ballistic?
Very tight.
Say it again.
It's like a very tight, static, moving stretch.
Kinda. Anybody want to take a shot?
Isn't it like bouncing in between? So if you're going to touch your toes, you'd like go up and not necessarily up and down, but just
Okay. You bring up a very good point. I think we can use that as a definition. You do need to know the difference between these three, so write them down. So static is held. We know that one, right? Easy. Dynamic is slow movement with control. Slow movement with control. Ballistic is a explosive bouncing motion where there is an element of no control. Explosive bouncing motion where there's an element of no control. Now, I want to explain that because no control isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay? Because as KD leaves the free throw line on his way for a slam dunk, is he in control? If he's in midair? Not really, but it's pretty cool, right? And it's really exciting, especially when they're playing the Cavs. And especially when he dunks over LeBron. That's awesome, right? There's an element of no control. Right, Taylor? Especially when Danny Green stuffs it versus Duke. Like, there's an awesome element. No control. Yeah, you will. You're right. But, so we don't necessarily need to categorize no controls as bad, but we need to put it in its right place, okay? Let's talk about static first. There's a lot of controversy. Static, dynamic, what do we do? Which one's good, which one's bad? Here's the thing. First thing I'll say is this. There is some research to suggest that static stretches held for a long period of time can decrease power output immediately following the stretch. Okay? But listen closely to what I said. Power stretches held for a long period of time. The studies that have been performed right now, the published ones that we have, show stretches held between 30 and 90 seconds. All right? So that's like a quad stretch for a really long time, right? And then some type of explosive movement after that. The power output is decreased. The strength, if you go into a heavy strength lift, is decreased. So that is definitely not recommended. If you're going to do static stretches, which some studies still show that static stretching is good for mobilizing, for, what's the word I'm looking for joint mobility, and for reduced pain and discomfort. If static stretching is a goal or is going to be a part of the warm-up, it needs to occur after the general, okay, and it needs to be light. 8 to 10 seconds if you're going to do it. Now, here's the thing. Some strength coaches choose not to do it. And I'm cool, because here's what they do. They use the dynamic and ballistic to accomplish all of the same goals. Okay? There's no research right now to suggest that static stretching causes injuries. It just shows that in some studies it's been shown that static stretching can reduce power. We did a study about 2 years ago. No, it was last year, a year and a half ago, on 35 athletes, 35 students, healthy students that were considered athletic in nature. And we compared static and ballistic and dynamic in a combination on vertical jump and long jump, and we didn't find any significant difference. So it really didn't matter what you did before. Okay? That's just one study. There are others. Dynamic is the one that really is kind of the gold standard at this point. That's the one that you definitely need to incorporate. And that's the movement with control. Okay? So we're going to talk about that on Thursday. We're going to do some of those things. But there are line drills, right? So like a walking lunge, right? Nice and slow, where you're really trying to engage the hip mobility when you're in that movement. Toe touches, heel walks. We'll do a variety of them on Thursday, but they're slow, they're controlled. Great, good, do them. Absolutely critical, okay? Ballistic is the exact opposite of static. If you're going to do ballistic, it needs to be towards the end of the general specific period, because it does involve movements that are explosive in nature, so the risk for injury is going to go where? Higher. Yeah. For a long time, people said, don't do them. Stay away from ballistic. They're bad. Okay? I wouldn't have my grandfather do ballistic. Right? That's probably not appropriate. But you need your basketball players to do ballistic. You need your lacrosse players to do ballistic, because those are the movements they're going to do in the sport itself. Okay? So what's an example of a drill we would do in warm-up that would be ballistic, not dynamic? Not quite to sprints yet, but sprints would be. Skips, yeah. Any type of skip. It's not slow and controlled. Skips are powerful. They're explosive. Okay? If you haven't done a power skip, we're going to do some on Thursday. We're going to see what we mean by that. Okay? There is an element of no control in a skip, but it's a fantastic warm-up protocol when it's used correctly. All right? Okay, let's see. Additional effects and benefits. Improved mental focus. So we're narrowing that scope a little bit more, right? We're focusing in a little bit closer. Think about how, even though it sounds probably routine to you, you've got to be a little bit more focused to do an A skip or a power skip ready to play. Sometimes it takes, a team I watch or a game I'm watching, it seems like it takes a whole quarter or the first half, the first 5 to 10 minutes for a team to actually get going. my first question, while sure, there could be some other mental things they're dealing with, but my first question, what does warm-up like? I mean, really, what's happening in the warm-up? Because, you know, I know there are going to be mental lapses. We're not always going to be, you know, perfect every single game, but we want to just make sure it's stuff we can control, okay? All right, so we're still building intensity, and now we are focused on more specific movements. Now, here's the thing. Do we always, as strength coaches, do we always have control over what's happening in this phase? As a strength coach, are we going to have control over what's happening in this phase? For conditioning days, yeah. For sport practice days, which the warm-up should not look any different for sport practice days, really, okay, than it does for conditioning days. The only thing that's going to change is what's specific to, okay? The cool thing is, if you've got a coach who's receptive to listening, you can talk to them. Not all coaches are, okay? So we don't necessarily go up to them and say, hey, your warm-up's wrong. That's not best practice for your job, probably. But if you have a coach who's receptive to listening to say, hey, coach, I think if you incorporated some of these things, it might help prepare us a little bit more. All right? A good friend of mine who was the strength coach at York High School, and now there's another guy I know is there now, but the head coach at York is all about the strength coach really help design practices and warm-ups, okay? And so he really had a say in what happened in warm-ups, what happened in practice. He actually warmed the guys up for games, which is really cool, okay, from his perspective. Now, other coaches, they don't, you know, they kind of do their thing, just different levels. So here, the coach, strength coach here that you met on last week, Coach Abbott, there's some of the coaches here at Winthrop that really are very receptive to listening to what he has to say regarding warm-up and drills and things like that, okay? But we don't always have a say here, and that's okay. But you see what would happen in specific warm-up for specific sports. We get the idea. Okay? What we do have control over in a say, though, is what happens in the specific warm-up when they come to see us. When it's conditioning days, when it's weightlifting days, when it's agility power days, now I can design the warm-up from beginning to end, okay? So what might I include in the specific phase for a day when the softball team is coming to the weight room? We're obviously not going to throw and catch if they're going to lift weights. What would they do in the specific phase instead?
Do some jump squats.
Okay, jump squats. What else?
Depends on the age, yeah.
Okay. Think about it. What are we trying to be specific to? Whatever we're going to do in our conditioning session. Karen, did you want to add to that? Is that what you were going to kind of say? Okay. So, yeah, in practice, it makes sense. We're specific to the sport because that's what we're about to play. In conditioning, our specific warm-up is our rehearsal for what we're going to do later. So if weight training, if it's max lift days, what are we doing in the specific warm-up then?
Body weight versions of the.
Okay? Low weight versions of whatever we're going to do later. Body weight squats, push-ups, stuff like that, right? If it's speed day, what are specific warm-ups for that type of conditioning?
Short sprints.
Okay? Lower intensity sprints, right? Sub-max sprints, building to max. If it's agility day, if it's a power day, you get the idea, okay? We are basically, we use this or think of this as rehearsal. Even if you think of it for the sport itself, it's the rehearsal, right? As practice for what we're going to do later. Okay, so specific warm-up for conditioning can be considered the practice round for what is going to come later. All right? Okay, so I want you to talk to a neighbor for a few minutes. I want you to talk to them about any experience with the sport that you've played or that you've been a part of in any way, okay, as a trainer or a volunteer or manager or whatever. And I want you to explain the warm-ups that you've seen or that you've experienced, okay? And how closely do they follow this protocol? So let's sum up. What's the time frame for our warm-up then? Maximum was what? 30 minutes. Minimum is 15, because each section could be 5 to 10 minutes long. Does that make sense? What's the problem with being too short? Probably not ready. What's the problem with 30 minutes or longer? Maybe too much, right? You've got to find that healthy medium in between. Will all of them be exact same time frames? No. You might spend a little bit longer in the general specific, or a little bit longer in specific versus the general, okay? So talk just about your experiences with warm-up and just how they relate to the perfect warm-up we just designed here, okay? Go. It's good now, but for about 2 weeks, somehow I tweaked my left shoulder, so my range of motion, it just wasn't as comfortable once I got past this point. So I had a limited, Rex can tell us about that, right? Range of motion, okay? After surgery, that range of motion isn't usually as great as what you would want it to be, okay? But the purpose is to increase elasticity. Of course, that's kind of maybe not necessarily the correct term. We want to activate the elasticity because the muscles are elastic. That's what gives us that explosiveness. Prepare the body for movement and decrease risk of injury and stiffness, okay? So many benefits from flexibility, okay? Someone says, why should I be involved in a flexibility program? As an exercise scientist, an athletic trainer, a coach, whatever, physical therapist, these are things that you need to tell them. All right, we're not going to go through every one of them. It's online. You guys can look it up. But it really improves, number one, mobility. Okay, and when you're more mobile, you can do more things. Okay, that's a huge benefit. If you haven't taken yoga, you've never had a yoga class, you need to go do it. Okay, you need to see just the differences in mobility that people have. And some of it can be extreme. Can you be too flexible? Of course. All right, we see that in very few sports, we see that as a problem. The majority of the problem is what? Not flexible or too tight, right? Things that can affect your flexibility, of course, joint structure, age and sex, connective tissue, and certain weight training programs. Muscle bulk, some people believe that that's actually a myth. If you don't believe me, look up bodybuilding. They're extremely flexible and they're extremely bulky. Okay? And then, but previous injuries are real. Like that can definitely affect your flexibility. Okay? Some of you that might have had a knee or shoulder injury, that one injured area is probably really struggling to get the level of flexibility that the other area has. All right, so stretch, this kind of just goes along with what we've already talked about. Athletes should stretch before and after conditioning, practice, and competition in some way, whether it's a combination of dynamic and static, or dynamic and ballistic, before or after. Okay, there's got to be, in your mind, flexibility should be pretty synonymous with mobility. That's the term we're really starting to use more in our field. Okay, movement, screening. Okay, and I'm going to teach you on Thursday how we can actually use these types of movements to identify problems in the warm-up. If I'm working with a team, I know who's too tight, who needs more hip work, who needs more ankle work, who needs more shoulder work, just in the 15 minutes we're warming up. Right? It doesn't take a lot to do that. Okay, you guys can go through the guidelines for static, ballistic, and dynamic. You'll need to do that. That's the next 3 or 4 slides here. But let me ask you this. Why would lower body flexibility affect the injury rates of UCL and pitchers. Stand up, figure it out before we leave. Why would lower body flexibility impact UCL injury rates in baseball pitchers? Stand up, figure it out. Tell me. Nathan,
What's the U?
what you got? All right, let's listen to what Nathan comes up with. Why would flexibility of the lower body put risk to a baseball pitcher's elbow?
Have less movement down there, so it's going to require more power from your arm and put more stress on your UCL.
Let me see your best pitch. Show me your movement. Okay, it's not just upper body. What happens? Come on, what happens? Right? There's a huge, because what are they trying to generate there? Momentum, power, explosiveness. If this is limited because of movement, I should have assigned this to somebody. And what's going to happen? It's going to cause the arm to have to work harder, compensate, increase stress, increase potential for UCL injuries. All right, I'll see you on Thursday. Dress out.